In part 1 of this guide, we have seen that Swarmling was really the imposter. Although their name evokes a swarm of units spreading across the game board, they should really be played as small intel as possible, a strategy referred to as 7-structure Swarmlings. In this video, we will look at the consequence of this strategy for Swarmlings starting spots. Welcome to the Ultimate Guide to Swarmlings, Part 2. So hi everyone, this is going to be a short video where we will tackle the issue of where Swarmling should start in view of the 7-structure strategy. So we'll go for the base map mainly, but I've included some thoughts on the Fire and Ice map since Arena is on there this season. Alright, so let's get on with it. Mainly, so traditionally Swarmlings will start in this spot and this spot. And the reason for that, I think, is there's two reasons for that. This spot is obviously very good because Swarmlings has a lot of free hexes, and this spot was meant to give Swarmlings two things: a leech, because there's usually a gray or a red player in the game, so you have a leech and a cheap way to build your first trading post. And eventually possibility to connect this very, very good cluster with this one. And the big drawback of this was there's a lot of cheap hexes around for Swarmlings, but they will need a bridge to do a town with this. And bridges are really, really inefficient structures and also kind of dangerous. Sometimes you can get your spot taken, especially say there's a black player who may threaten to ship, so it forces you to do something quicker than you would have wanted. Also, often the way it happens, you will end up giving a lot of leech to the gray player, because usually the gray player will be there, we will take these two hexes. So it's not an ideal starting spot for these reasons. But in the traditional views of Swarmlings, that's where people started, because it was the only way to make those two things of having a cheap trading post, but also having the possibility to play on network and connecting. Since we are not looking to play on network on this strategy, because we've decided to give that up straight away, what we will do instead is consider very strongly starting here on complete haste. Here it will grant us a neighbor for sure, because you will have either the gray or the black player. That's one thing, the gray player almost have to start here, so we know that we are going to have a neighbor there. So that's one advantage. We have starting spots here, and we have a cheap town in terms of digging in either to the south with these 3 hexes, so it's 3 digs for a town, or to the north, which is 3 digs for a town. So contrary to this spot, which will require to have 3 digs too, but also a bridge. So here it's cheaper to do your town here. And the other obvious reason for starting here will be the kind of disturbance that will cause to other players, but we'll come back on that. But just on the face value of it, by giving up network, we made sure that we can have a strategy based on a town. So that gives us the same thing than the spot. It gives us a cheap trading post and will give us leech, often more leech than here. But it free us from the necessity to build a bridge, and that's huge. And at the same time, as I said, we kind of bother our neighbor a little bit. So especially a black player would have liked to connect these 2 black hexes. Now we cannot anymore. And then the other spot that we will consider is this one. And the idea of this one, so starting east and west is fine, as we don't care about connection, but we can also start southeast with the boat dwellings. And the idea of this one is even more disturbance, as we will see in a minute. Last possibility, so this is more in the classical strategy. Sometimes if you were sure to have a neighbor just to escape the pressure of others, sometimes you will go there, so that's a possibility too. I've seen this hacks to work. That is, if you're playing with landscape and plan to do a mega town, it's possible to do it, but those are, I consider, quite minor spots. I consider the spots sometimes when there is giants in the game, and I want to have an easier way, not being bothered. But the main spots that you really should consider are the purple one on this map, so these three ones, which is the ones that you will aim for. So let's consider more in detail the disturbance value of the southeast spot. So that will be especially efficient against gray, green, brown, black faction. So of course all these four won't be in the game at the same time if you have Swarmling on a 4-player game, but it's just to say that this is the kind of faction that this strategy can help you to disturb. So and again, that's a very important point. Once you've decided to give up network with Swarmlings, one very important thing that it helps you, that it lets you do, is to focus on using your starting spots and using your development to harm other players. So by starting here and here, first of all, as I said, you give all kind of trouble to black player who would have loved to link these two hexes. For him, it's 4 hex that cost only to dig, so that's really good. So by blocking that, you make it much more difficult for him. And also by starting here, often black will like to start here, but now it makes the spot a lot less good, because you're putting pressure on this X, and if you win this race, then the town here is not as easy and not as natural as it was. So you may force him to start on the less optimal hex here. And if he does start still here anyway, as I said, you disturb him by forcing, not letting him connect, and you put some kind of pressure on this hex. It doesn't mean that you have to dig it straight away, because you can still town up going on toward the northeast. So there is no necessarily pressure on you, but there is kind of pressure on him to take this hex, and that's interesting because that might force him to do suboptimal move. Then you have gray or green, usually, so especially gray. So that's a great strategy against engineers, for example, because engineer will use a lot this path, because for 1 jig you can get these 2 free ones with 1 digging. And same is true with dwarves, especially dwarves without landscape. They love to have this kind of network of hexes. So by starting here and taking the green hex before engineers, you or dwarves, you kind of take away a very interesting path for them on the map. And same is true for green. One of the good thing about green in this map is that they have this hex for only 1 shipping, this free hex for only 1 shipping. So if you can start here and take that away from him, it's a big nuisance to him. And then there's brown. Brown is strong on this map, and one of the things that they are trying to do often is connect this way. So by starting here and taking the black hex early, you will be able to really bother their connection, and that's extremely disturbing for cultists. It makes them very hard to bid in the auction, because now if Swarmling is in the game, it's much harder for them to connect as long as Swarmling start here. So again, by giving up the top of networks, we are focusing on what we're efficient as Swarmlings, and at the same time it lets us also bother rather about blocking others' possibility rather than than trying to achieve our cell network. So Swarmlings becomes a very kind of disturbing factor in the game, and you can really use that to your advantage. In a situation, for example, very common matchup where you have gray, brown, and black, right? On Snellman, that's very often the three first factions that are picked are Darklings, Cultists, and Engineers. All of a sudden, by starting with these two hexes, you've caused problem to everyone. Engineers lost their easy path toward these three hexes, Darklings lost their connection between the two black hexes, and Cultists lose their easy path connection. So you're harming everyone else, and it makes Swarmlings relatively better to. So in conclusion, your first dwelling will always be here, because it gives you a cheap trading post, and it gives you early leech, and it gives you reasonable town cost in here. And then your second dwelling will be either here or here, and the choice between these two spots will depend on your feeling for the game. So here is almost always, as we've seen, very disrupting for others, but it also means that you have to rush to get these hexes before anyone else, because other people will want them too. So you have to be sure that you're able to do this while being able to get the hex that you want in here. So sometime, for example, you will have to make your first town a little later, because you will start by taking these hexes. You'll do your stronghold here, and you take these hexes here. So that means delaying a little bit your first town, often if you go for this setup. And if you want to play for an early town, maybe rather than playing the disturbing hexes here, you might prefer to go here, which usually you won't have much pressure for these hexes. So you can take your time and just develop here for your early town, either to the north or to the south. And so yeah, that's how I will encourage you to think about Swarming starting spots. And really emphasizing the disturbing factor and the denying factor, which is rare in Tyrannistica. I would say Swarmlings is probably, maybe with Giants, the only faction which will focus on that early on. And the reason, again, you can even, say you have nomads in the game, normally in the traditional approach you will jump on this hex because it's a lot of common leech between the two factions. It's fine as a strategy, you can still do that, but you may want to consider starting here still, because if it's nomad or if it's fakirs, any yellow faction, they will probably get more of you than in the cooperation and the trade of leeches, partly because, well, Swarmlings don't need to make cheap trading posts, but also Swarmlings buildings are more expensive, so meaning that you get less out of every power that you receive than your yellow neighbor. So it's possible to decide to still start southeast and this against a yellow player, just to kind of deny the leech that he was expecting to get. So that's really the kind of mentality that you have to get when you're playing Swarmlings and picking their starting spot. So just to conclude this video, a word about Swarmling starting spots on the Fire and Ice map, since Arena is on Fire and Ice map. Now I'm not a specialist of this map, so take everything I say here with a grain of salt. It's more like kind of common sense things. I think the first main spot Swarmlings want to look for in this map will be this one, a kind of isolationist Swarmlings. So probably the dwelling that's going to be more the town that you're going to do away from others. The reason for that is that you have cheap hexes around that are not likely to be contested early on. So you probably do want to do your town in this area, somewhere like this. And then the other dwellings will depend kind of where the others are and what you can reasonably expect to do. I'd say that probably one of these, so either straight in the middle, which we will often be forced to do, or on the south island here, depending on which you have a neighbor. So most of the time your neighbor will be in the center area, which is kind of unfortunate because it might be very hard to town up there. So if you have to, you may have to, but you'll need to be able to secure some of these hexes in order to be able to town up, and that might be really hard. Because often this area in this map is where all the action is concentrated early on. So it's very possible that you are not able to town up there. If you're able to town up, it's going to be great. It's going to be a great place to leech. But if you're not, it's possible that you're not able to town up, so then maybe you can get a bunch of leech out of your central building and try to use that to expand at some other area of the map, and try to do 2 towns in different area. Maybe that's kind of let you a little away from your print of 7 structures. You may have to go with 9 structures, but sometimes you just don't have the choice. On the south, one of these 2 spots, if you can get a neighbor, it can be great, but it can be especially great if you can take this hex, because then you link to 2 blue hexes, so that will be really good. You also have some interesting hexes around. So the thing is, again, is that this hex might be very competitive. There's a red player, for example, or usually they will be very interested with this X, and same can be true with the green players. So if it's possible, it's going to be great, but often you don't have any neighbor here, or if you have one, it's going to be really hard to make sure that you secure the gray hex. So again, I think Swarmlings are a lot less obvious on this map. Their starting spots are a lot less obvious and more difficult to choose, to pick, and they will be more context dependent. Finally, there's these 2 hexes which are possible, and finally there's this possibility of this area. If you can get a neighbor. Unfortunately you have no blue hex to start with here, so you will have here to start here. So that will be maybe the big problem starting here. It doesn't look like a bad spot, but it's kind of unlikely that you get a neighbor early on. If there is a great player and he starts here, then maybe. I sometimes black can start here, but against blue I think it's very unlikely. So again, that could be an interesting spot as long as you're able to have a neighbor. Otherwise, as an isolationist spot, I prefer the eastern one. Alright, so that concludes our video. I hope it helped you understand better Swarmlings starting spots, and it's more specifically how you should think about your starting spot as Swarmlings. It requires a kind of different frame of mind than other faction, because you're much more aggressive and much more denying in the way you start, because you don't care about connection. So the only thing you care is causing problem for others, while having reasonably good spots that don't cost you too much to terraform. Alright, thank you guys. Bye bye.